Join your host, Maddie Roche, as she brings you into a community of fee-only financial advisors who are successfully building profitable businesses that serve the next generation of clients. Learn from innovative advisors whose unique stories will inspire you to dream big and take action on your goals. Are you ready to live your best life and help your clients live theirs? Then you're in the right place.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm Maddie Roche, your host. I'm excited to have XYPN member Leslie Ransom, owner of Indie Financial Planning, a fee-only firm in Chicago, Illinois, on the show today. Leslie spent nearly 2 decades on the sale and distribution side of the music industry, working with bands and music labels all across the nation. However, when the music economy began to move to digital and the U.S. economy headed into the 2008 recession, she found herself without a job. But she also found herself answering questions of her former colleagues about money and budgeting. As such, in 2010, Leslie made a career change. In her 40s, Leslie began her CFP curriculum and snagged an internship. In 2015, she launched her own firm with 0 clients. As a career changer, Leslie admits that she has struggled with the imposter syndrome in selling her own services. However, through networking, she stumbled upon an invaluable contact that led her to Delegated Planning, a financial planning subcontractor firm, where she began to work part-time as she built her own business. Leslie talks about what it's like to be employed at a place other than her own firm and why she's been so intentional about building Indie slowly. She talks about how we as an industry really care about our end consumer and how the abundance mentality has been really easy to embrace. Today, Leslie finds herself at a crossroads. Does she ramp up building her own firm, or does she continue to do the work she loves behind the scenes to support other advisors? If you're interested in how to jump careers, this show is for you. Avocado toast, selfies, a mountain of student loan debt. Gen Y is anything but traditional, and with over 75 million people, it's a population you don't want to ignore. Learn more about how to serve this unique population in our guide called Attract and Profitably Serve Millennial Clients in Your RIA. Discover 3 key ways to tap into the millennial market and 6 things that they want from their financial advisor. Visit xyplanningnetwork.com/millennials for your free copy. You can find any of the resources we mentioned during today's episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/261. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Leslie. Hey, Leslie, welcome to XYPN Radio.
Hey, how's it going, Maddie?
It's good. I'm so excited to be online with you today, Leslie. Why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little intro?
Okay. My name is Leslie Ransom. I am a CFP, and I run my own firm, Indie Financial Planning, based here in Chicago, the fabulous city. And I've been in business only through XYPN. I launched with XYPN. I think I joined in 2015, and I launched my firm in 2016. And my background is not in financial planning. So I was in the music industry for, 20, 25 years in sales and marketing. And in 08, 09, when everything sort of fell apart, I lost my job and tried to figure out what to do next. And that basically involved helping some of my creative friends figure out their path, because they were really good at making music or being creative, but not at balancing a checkbook. So it sort of opened up this need for, whether they're self-employed or whether they're just sort of, joining the gig economy as the gig economy was growing, the need for planning fundamentally on that level. So that sort of was what prompted me to jump into planning.
Yeah, give the listeners a little bit of perspective in terms of your current firm and the number of clients you serve. And then I do know that you spend a large portion of your time kind of subcontracting with other planners.
Right.
Give the listeners a taste of that, and then we're going to dive into all of the good stuff.
Okay. Well, when I started, like I said, I didn't come from the financial planning world. So I didn't have any clients. I was literally starting from zero. I didn't have anyone I could bring over from a pre-existing firm. And it's just me. So I didn't really have the opportunity of not making money from the very beginning. So that's always a challenge, that's the scary part. As I joke, I can't get my animals to make any money for me, so I have to make all the money, right? And so there's a woman based in Colorado named Susan Chesney, and she runs a firm called Delegated Planning. And what she does is strictly financial planning, doesn't look at investments. That's not something that we look at. But it's reaching out to firms of all stripes. A lot of them are fee only. A lot of them are CFPs, but they're not necessarily NAPFA. They're not necessarily fee only. And some of them are investment advisors. They're not planners. And so they see a need for planning for their clients, particularly as the market is changing and there's more and more of a focus on fiduciary and on, those needs. Being able to offer that as a service to your clients as a value add, if you will, to the AUM. But it's not enough that that it merits bringing someone on board full time. And so they come to Delegated, and we literally do plans for their clients. We don't interact with the end client. We strictly interact with the planner client or the advisor client. And it's actually really, like, she sort of is overwhelmed with people who want us to do that. And what we bring to the table is, I forget how many there are now, 5 or 6 of us that work with her. We are all CFPs.
Wow.
We all run, we don't all, a lot of us run our own RIAs. So we're all licensed so we have the credentials, and it's more than just paraplanning.
Right.
It's not entering the data. So part of why people come to us is we have the expertise. We're continuing to get the CEs. We're keeping up our CFP status. We're, part of our responsibility to those clients is, okay, what does the Secure Act mean to these people that we're planning for, and being able to bring that to the conversation, because that's what they're paying us for. And so we get paid probably more than an average paraplanner to do that. So that's been, initially it was the majority of my business. Working, when I first started, as I was sort of bringing people on. And my main focus in launching my firm was to be a planner more than an investment advisor, because a lot of the people I was looking at coming from the indie rock community, hence indie financial planning, they're not high net worth people. They're not looking for investment management.
Right.
And so what they really wanted to know was, okay, wow, it turns out I'm 30 or not 20 anymore, and I'm married and we have a kid and we want to buy a home, and I need to figure out how to navigate all of this because it's a brave new world and we don't get that sort of training. So what I do for people is anything from cash flow analysis to try and build ways of managing irregular income, or even if there's a regular paycheck coming in, maximizing savings and dealing with, I have clients who are earning plenty, but they have young kids. And so the saving is really hard when you have young kids because you have to pay for daycare. And so balancing, both partners going to work, or only one of them going to work. What's the benefit of more work if you're paying for childcare? Stuff like that. And then obviously running out plans to show, if you keep saving this much, here are some target savings amounts going forward, so that they can feel a little more confident that they don't have to work until they're 105, right? And half the time, it's really just pointing out the obvious. I think that's one of the things we as planners do, is sort of like when I start looking at people who are really, really nervous about what's coming or what's going to happen. And I'm like, well, you're in better shape than I am. And I can but it's giving them that reassurance to sort of show, well, here's what happens if, here are a few steps you can take to secure it, or, so pairing those two things. And then in the past, probably year or so, I have started doing more investment management, and brought some more of that into the firm, so that now what I do with delegated planning versus what income I bring in through planning and management on my own it's starting to shift. Although, I keep taking on more work with so they're both growing. So, it's not that the overall total stays the same. The pie is growing
with the same number of hours a week.
More hours for sure.
Fascinating combination of interests, but also I think one that gives credit to you as a career changer, being able to successfully build a business and be around 4 or 5 years later is something to be really proud of. And we all have our own definition of success and our own definition of what our ideal firm looks like, on top of kind of what we expect our day-to-day to look like. I really want to talk about how you balance delegated as well as indie at the same time. But before we get there, let's go back in time to kind of you before financial planning. I think it's always so important for our listeners who are career changers to understand that there's a really big, diverse pre-financial planning experience you can come to this industry with. And I think yours is particularly interesting, given that it's really focused on musicians and creatives and things like that. Could you tell us about what you were doing before financial planning and get us up into that aha moment of when you realized you want to make the switch?
Sure. Well, a million years ago, when I was in college, I was an econ major.
Okay.
And my father's an economist, so I have that background in terms of, money and all that good stuff. But I'm decidedly a rebel, so I didn't particularly want to join corporate America, for better or worse, when I was younger. And I just sort of set out, literally got in my car, drove across the country, and relocated when I graduated from college, and ended up working at a record store because that was an interest of mine and helped me get to know people in a new town. And eventually I sort of worked my way into working in sales and distribution in the music industry. So I worked at a label in Boston, and then I moved here to Chicago in 91 and worked for a distributor, and eventually started working for a record label called Touch and Go Records that was based here in Chicago. It's pretty well known in the indie alternative community at the time. And I was there for about 16 years.
Wow.
At the same job.
Cool.
And basically it was a fascinating time to be in that niche of the music industry. There was a lot of things that were changing and growing, and we were all kind of flying by the seat of our pants. There weren't educational programs for how to run a record label back then. Like my boss, the only other job he ever had besides being a musician and running a label was being a Domino pizza delivery guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he never went to college. And so it was all this very self-taught kind of thing, and trying to balance running a business where suddenly he had a business with 25 people in an industry where, we're supposed to be fighting against, corporate America, or fighting against everything. But we had, I worked with some somewhat household names now, between Touch and Go and between the other labels that we managed. I worked with TV on the Radio. I worked with the Arcade Fire. I worked with the Decemberists, all these different people, Sleater Kinney. And it became, so the part of my job was sales and marketing.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was, okay, this is how well we think this release is going to do. how much money are we going to put towards marketing? And granted, as things progressed, that was changing a lot between all these stores that don't exist anymore, like Tower and Borders and, whatever. And of course, digital starting to take over. And that model really shifted how we were doing things. But it was sort of, how do we maximize exposure for an artist without eating into the profits that they're theoretically going to be able to earn from the record? And that was something that mattered to us in the indie community, to make that work. So that was sort of a big part of my job, as well as just letting people know what was going on, particularly with bigger bands as things happened, whether it was press or radio or whatever, to encourage retailers or digital retailers to highlight the record and to make it more available to people. But the combination of the rise of digital, and that really shrank profit margins, because no one thinks they need to pay for digital, right? So
of course, it's all free, right?
It's this sort of perpetual. It's a problem with being an artist. You talk to anyone who's a graphic designer or an illustrator, and the number of people who are like, "Well, can't you just do this for free?" Oh, they constantly think that and it's part of it with digital, with the rise of Napster, which I know is totally dating me, but this idea that we can get it for free.
Right.
And I think, so that becomes this challenge of intellectual copyright.
Yeah.
But, so the music industry, I think, was challenged already. And then when 08, 09 came around, it really just hit hard, because people stopped buying non-essentials, and, music became one of those things. And so basically my boss decided to close down, or whatever. He laid off 22 out of 23 people.
Wow. No joke.
Yeah, really, really fun time to dismantle, everything I'd built over those 16 years. But, we were all sort of floundering, and I was like, well, maybe I can do consulting or find another gig. But music industry people, as well as everyone else in the economy, everyone was losing their jobs.
Right.
So, there wasn't like there was new openings that I could jump into. And I sort of went back and forth of, I don't want to live in New York or LA and work in the music industry.
Right.
I should qualify, my family's out near LA, and they would have liked me to move there, but I didn't. And I was also watching friends, not just ex-colleagues, but musicians that I'd worked with, designers, other people that I knew just from 20 years in the Chicago community, struggling with trying to figure out how to make it work and what their next moves were going to be, and starting new careers and going back to school, or trying to figure out what they could leverage to make it work. And I was someone that sort of had, when Touch and Go was closing, for instance, we had a 401k plan, and everyone was like, well, I'm just going to cash it out. And I was like, no, don't cash it out. Cause it's, and they're like, well, it's not worth what we put into it. And I was like, I know, but here's the idea, is that this is going to happen. It's going to come back. And if you cash it out now, you're going to take a penalty on those assets, because we're not 60. And everyone's looking at me like, how do you know any of this?
Yeah. Or care, I'm sure.
Right. And I was like, well, and that's sort of when I realized that there just was no education on this. And I was like, this isn't the first bump in the market, and just throw the statements away and don't look at them. And you're going to be, if you can afford. Now, some people had to cash them out because they had no other resources. And that's fine. That is what it is. But it was sort of watching that, and watching people make what to me were poor decisions. Yeah. Even without sort of, like I said, I have an econ degree, so that's where some of that's coming from. But just sort of being like, gosh, if there's anything else you can do to leave that savings alone, you should really try to do it. And, all this time later, of course, not today, but 2 weeks ago,
Mm-hmm.
that same account that was worth next to nothing when I quit is worth twice what it was, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that sort of drove me to be like, okay, here's something apparently that I have to offer and that people need. Because people were sort of being like, I don't know, ask Leslie. She seems to know what's going on with this. And so I could answer questions about it, those sorts of things. And I was meeting with a career counselor, trying to figure out where I was going to go next. I ran a pet care company, so I was dog walking and cat sitting for a couple of years to pay the bills and all of that good stuff, and basically discovered the CFP program. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
The financial planning is really interesting. And so that sort of sent me down this, I went back to school and was very fortunate that I went to the physical school. So I would go to class once a week or whatever at Northwestern at their continuing ed program here in Chicago. Wow. And one of the teachers, they would pull from the professional community to have people teach the CFP program. And one of the guys who was teaching was, his name was Sid Blum. He passed away a year ago, maybe a little less. But he had become a CFP in the late 70s, early 80s. He was an early practitioner, had, started firms and so on and so forth. And he had a small firm in Evanston, a near Chicago suburb. And he did internships. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go be an intern at, I don't remember how old I was,
wow,
40 something. And that sort of, plus I needed the experience in order to be a CFP, because you have to have a certain number of years of experience. And for some reason, they didn't want to recognize my time in the music industry as applying to.
Ridiculous.
I know. What are they thinking?
I should write them a letter.
And so doing that, and he sort of brought me on as an intern, and it allowed me to get time under my belt so that I could fully qualify as a CFP. And the timing worked out that when in 2015, I passed the CFP exam in 2013 and became fully certified in 2015. And he was, 70 something, and looking to sort of scale back and retire. And he was going to pass his firm off. He was selling to another firm, and they were fine, but just didn't have the same focus that I had. And about that same time, I discovered, things like XYPN and Garrett. And there's another one that I'm forgetting about.
ACP.
Yes, ACP. There were organizations that sort of help crazy people like me who don't really know what they're doing be able to launch a business and make it work.
Yeah. And I must give you some credit, Leslie, that you were one of the first. You joined in August of 2015, and at that point, XYPN was still in its infancy in a lot of ways, and you were kind of the first of the wave of career changers that came to XYPN when we really realized that we're very much a platform for entrepreneurs, regardless of whether you've been in the industry or not. And I think you're such a good example that really the onus is on you and the advisor and the member to make sure that they're ready and able to be a good financial planner. But what we can help you with at XYPN is how to do it on your own and how to build the business. And I give you so much credit for in your 40s pursuing the CFP, deciding to pivot, going out and getting an internship, working with people in the industry, and then finding a way to make it work long term. And I think that's where you can really provide a lot of value to our listeners. At this juncture, when you decided to start your firm, you really have come in with comparatively very little experience in the industry, but a real energy to serve a certain type of person, serve them in a certain type of way. And I want to know how you did that, and who did you really set out to work with? And then I think we can really get into this delegated planning relationship where you began to build and keep yourself financially afloat by taking a full-time job or up to a full-time job with a different company. So I guess let's get into that. So to answer my first question, who did you want to work with?
Well, my main target was, I love creatives. And so, I was like, that might be too narrow of a niche. And a lot of them don't have any money. So
yep.
You have to have a client that's going to be able to pay you, right? Going back to that free services idea that we were just on. So I sort of narrowed it more to self-employed or a small business, and and again, a lot of trying to figure out how to target that is complicated, but a lot of it was I think there's sort of two avenues of clients that have come to me. One of them definitely are sort of not always creatives, but definitely self-employed, and very much solo practitioner type people, or maybe one or two people in a company that are looking for just figuring out how the pieces work and how do you run a budget when you don't know what the income's going to be, and how do you try to smooth out those highs and lows of those sorts of things, as well as things like tax deferred savings, SEP or solo 401ks, or those sorts of things that people maybe more now, but don't really know what is out there as an option for savings.
Yeah.
And then also people who sort of have a distrust of the financial industry, which I think is a real, probably still something we're feeling from 08, 09, from like the Bernie Madoffs of the world, right? Is that the financial industry is seen as predatory rather than supportive, And so a lot of the people that have come to me, and I think XYPN speaks to this as well, and the CFPs in general. And I'm really grateful for the CFP programs going out and being aggressive with advertising and pushing fiduciary and pushing planning as opposed to investments as a big part of what this is all about. But I've had people come to me because they basically get that I'll understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
And the irregular income is a big part of that because the planning software, you plug in an income and it goes up incrementally year over year based on inflation or whatever it is. And if you're self-employed, it can be a lot more complicated. And so a lot of what we're planning for in terms of what levers we pull on for stress testing or for successes is saying, well, what happens if, I have a client who went back to school. She became an animator. She's been very, and she sort of became more successful than she thought she would all of a sudden, doing commercials, doing animation, doing all of these things. Chicago has a big ad community. Yeah. So she's been, but she sort of has told me when we've been looking at stuff, I don't know, probably 10 years from now, I'm going to lose my edge. I'm not going to be the next new thing. There's going to be people coming in who are 10, 20 years younger than I am, who are going to, so she sort of wants to build it. It's not necessarily retirement. It's that she's going to have, that it's going to fall off, right. The one day you're in, the next day you're out idea, that is so true in a lot of creative industries. And so trying to come up with ways to help people. I have clients that are earning, $500,000 or $600,000 a year, but are perpetually concerned that if the bottom falls out of whatever they're doing for whatever reason, and, the current situation is nerve-wracking on that front. How do they prepare for that?
And
And so that became sort of one of my targets, was trying to help people feel more confident going forward and in the decisions that they made.
And I love the perspective you could offer those clients that you lived through it. I mean, and you lived through a 16-year career that came down, to screeching halt in 2008. And I think that just the fundamental comfort of knowing that someone who's going to provide you advice has also lived through something similar. Talk to us, Leslie, about kind of the decision to not build your firm full-time, that you went and engaged with delegated planning in a capacity for an employment. That's a decision I've actually talked to a lot of members about over the past several episodes, is some folks that decided to build part-time firms. We just had Tyler Landis on the call on the XYPN radio just last week, and he works full-time at Ziders Enterprises, which helps service our service people. And that was a really intentional decision on his behalf. And it was part of his alignment with his own financial philosophy, that he didn't want to go negative when he built this firm. And I'm interested in your decision, because it's not an easy decision to say people are going to go out on their own and then also stay employed. So talk to the listeners about that.
Well, I think, I had spent whatever that would be, 6 years, I guess. Well, maybe it was like 4 years. Wait, sorry. I'm trying to figure out the timing of when I went back to school. So I guess there was sort of 2 years between losing my job and deciding to go back to school to be a CFP. And it was just, living the gig economy, right? Because I lost all of my income. I didn't have a severance package or anything like that. Whatever was my last day was my last day. I think I could have stretched it out a little longer, but at some point that was not mentally healthy. And so, I was trying to, I was trying to offer support to other labels or to other bands or, people in the industry. But like I said, the whole industry and 0809 was so weird that all of that was just falling apart. So I was like, well, I guess I have to figure something out. I had a friend who was running a dog walking pet sitting company, and I went and did that, so I was dog walking and trying to do what I could to help labels that were still in practice, off hours, and trying to figure out what I could do to make money. And I had some savings, and I had, lucky for me, I have a very supportive and solvent family that were willing to sort of chip in and help me get things going. But sort of as I was like, okay, I need to make this a career, I really needed to make it financially viable. It's really hard on your self-esteem if you can't pay, if you're borrowing money when you're not, 22, or at least there was for me. I've always had issues with that. And I had a variety of situations that allowed me some comfort. I bought the building I live in 1 million years ago, and it's a rental property. And so as a result, like I live in one unit and I rent out the other unit. So I have a really low cost of living. And so that gave me some security. But there was just this sort of idea that I don't really have an option of not making money or losing money, fundamentally losing money, for a long term. And I also knew that in terms of marketing and putting myself out there, it was going to take a minute for people, in terms of circle of influence, right? People talk about, well, go to your circle of influence for clients or for recommendations. I was going to have to change the way they thought about me. Like, wow. In Chicago, I think a lot of people thought my last name was Touch and Go because that's how everyone knew me, was, oh, she's Leslie from Touch and Go. Because that was my role. And that was, and because I was in the music industry, that was my social circle as well. I would go out to shows and see bands, and, those are the people that I knew. So when you talk about center of influence, those were people that I was going to have to really change the way they looked at me in terms of my career. And that's not something that happens overnight. And just telling someone that you went back to school and passed a test doesn't necessarily guarantee confidence in something as fundamental as your finances.
Absolutely.
And so I knew that it was going to be an uphill battle. I forget. I think I was at a NAPFA convention because the firm I was interning at, were very active NAPFA members. And so they were kind enough to, one of the perks is that they would pay my fees and I would go to the NAPFA convention with them,
Great.
Which was great and an amazing networking and, problem solving area. And there was a panel of women who ran their own businesses. And one of the things they talked about was, sort of delegating out different things. So focusing on what you as a planner are really good at. And if it's not something that you really want to focus on doing, then find someone else who does it really well, whether it's helping to write blogs or doing marketing or, whatever those things are. And she mentioned this woman and said, this is the woman who does most of my plans for me. And I don't remember how I found her. It was not at that convention. But when I was starting to go out on my own, I was like, partly because I'm not going to have anyone give me their money to manage right away. One, because I don't know enough people with enough funds to manage. And again, trying to build my know-how. I was like, so where am I going to go to sort of help me get clients? And I decided to call her to see what her thought process was when she launched her firm. Because she specifically, all she does is planning for other planners. She doesn't want to be an investment manager. And so we had a long conversation and, I was fascinated by how she did things and she had a lot of the compliance and procedures and contracts and bookkeeping and all of that stuff in place. That there was a certain amount at some point in the conversation, I think she sort of said, so wait, are you asking me for a job? I said, well, is there one to be had? Like, I guess that's not why I called, and it became this sort of conversation where she was like, and, when she's bringing people on, she looks at expertise in different planning software, as well as, what focuses you can bring to help someone so that, because if we're working with an advisor who they use Money Guide Pro for their business, they're going to want to work with someone at Delegated who understands that software and who knows how to make it work. But basically it was, wow, well, this is a great way to subsidize my income. And to some extent, I can take on as much or as little as I want with her. I just have to be, there's, sometimes I wish there was more because we all go through, hot and cold in terms of the amount of work we have. Saying that I need less is a little bit harder, but, you commit to what you commit to. And I just found that it fit what I wanted to do. Like everyone has different passions. Mm-hmm. I don't mind managing investments, but it's just not where my real, that's not why I got into doing all of this.
Well, and as a career changer, it must be such a nice side gig to have where you're actively getting awesome planning experience and then you're getting the direction of someone you trust.
The experience, it's, the same benefits of, say, the forums with XYPN or with NAPFA. It's another group of trained, capable people that I can be like, hey, this isn't for one of our advisors, but, client just inherited, blah, 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 whatever. Here's my question. Because different people in the group have different focuses that they've worked on. Mm-hmm. And so being able to say, hey, I've got someone who's considering an S Corp versus an LLC, who's got tips on, where to go with that.
Yeah.
And obviously I can go out to the XYPN network or other networks, but this is 5 or 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a much more focused group of people, who understand what we're going through.
Yeah. And kudos to you that this connection and ultimately the employment opportunity came through networking to begin with. It didn't,
right.
I mean, it started at a NAPFA conference. So, I mean, we always try to communicate about the value of conferences and the power of them, that it isn't just a CE credit. I mean, it's that
right.
person you sat next to in that CE session may end up being kind of your gateway into the next career, the next option,
right.
the next opportunity.
Right. And I think, it's funny. I feel like I'm better at networking than I am at marketing to some extent. I'm not as good at just sort of putting myself out there, like, hey, let me do this for you. So I think as an industry, we are a really supportive group of people. Or at least that's what I have found. And it's sort of, and maybe it's everywhere. Like I used to do this when I was in the music industry. I had a group of people who were at similar labels who were in my position. And when we were battling, like, how do you deal with, Amazon's requesting this or that or the other from us? It's eating it, they want us to give them a discount. How do we deal with that? And so there was this group of people and we would get together and be like, so how are you dealing with this? And share ideas. And on a certain level, we were all in competition with each other. But on another level, we were all in the same boat. And so really, whatever, high tides raise all ships or whatever you want it to be. And so that sort of mentality, I think, has been with me for a long time, of going to people and being like, hey, this one's new to me, but I think you've dealt with it before. How did you manage it? Whatever it is. And I think planners and advisors, particularly in the NAPFA group, are really supportive. And I suppose, you're all going after the same high net worth clients, but particularly in the fee only arena,
right,
where, the nature of our businesses are based more on that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. Shout out to the abundance mentality, because we talk a lot about it on the podcast and just generally at XYPN, that ultimately, I think we all really at XYPN accept that we're better off, the more we can help each other, and the more that we can not have people waste time on recreating the wheel, we can really start, challenging and tackling some of the bigger issues that we have in our future. But Leslie, I'm particularly interested in what is this decision to work, whether it be full-time or part-time with delegated planning, what impact did that have on your ability to grow Indie? And what does that mean for your business and your ego related to that?
Certainly it gives me confidence, right? I talked about this with my study group with XYPN. When we first launched, regardless of the background, there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome, where, this fear of, am I really qualified to tell someone what to do with their money? And we're in to me, there's a lot at stake if we get it wrong. And there's also, in many cases, not a right answer, right? That's what makes it, that's why people are coming to us. But, but having regular feedback of, haven't thought of that from another advisor when I give them a plan, because I'm not going to the end client, it gives me a little bit more of a sounding board. So I used to joke with the XYPN study group that I had less trouble putting together a plan and sending it off to an advisor to give to their client than I did putting together plans for my end client. Because when I sent it to the advisor, they could always come back to me and be like, are you sure about this? Or interesting, I hadn't thought about that. Whatever. They could give me feedback before it went to the end consumer for actions to be taken on it. Whereas if I'm giving you a plan and you're taking actions on that, there's that buffer isn't there.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that.
So on that level, it's been confidence building, because I can sort of be like, oh, look, I do know more about this than someone else, or I am right about this, or, my approach works. I think it's also really helped me see the value in finding the right client. Because there's times where, and this is one of the challenges of doing the subcontract planning, is the advisor will say, well, I want, plug in this rate of return or do this thing. And I'll sort of be like, really? You want to tell them they're going to be able to make that much money? And like, it's hard to know how much to push back. And, being careful not to always show a rosy picture, because it's hard as a planner when you have to go back to someone and be like, yeah, we have a lot of work to do. That's difficult to say to someone and to have to build that. And so you have to be careful not to fall into traps of manipulating the information to make it say what you want it to say.
Right.
So those sorts of challenges, and mostly just being able to talk about planning and what it does. I feel like I'm much more articulate about it, so that if I'm meeting a prospective client, I know what the software can do. I know what's possible. And so I'm better able to sort of say, I understand you want to try and figure out that problem. I don't know how I can possibly model it. Here's what we can model. And maybe that'll help you with decisions as you approach whatever it is.
Yeah.
Because we can only put so many qualifiers on all the gazillion variables that are real life, day to day. Yeah. So it certainly did that. I suppose maybe on a downside, it's made me less aggressive with marketing.
Interesting. Talk to us about that.
Just because, as I mentioned, I am not prone to be a really good self-promoter, and that's a downside. But sort of, I'm busy enough and I'm making money. And so that makes it easier to come up with things to do other than writing a blog or hunting down clients or whatever it is. So there's some of that. I have found it was mostly sort of last year, which would have been the start of my 2016 was my first full year. So the start of my fourth year in business, as a company, for whatever reason, and I don't know whether it was just that, I had a lot of people who were old connections, non-financial connections, who maybe had sort of said, oh yeah, we should talk about that or whatever. But people who came to me, who'd either sort of been floating around the periphery or had sort of reached a point that when they decided to make that decision to get into planning and that's where a lot of my investment management investments have come from, are from old colleagues, old people that whatever.
And enough time had passed that they see you as this expert.
I mean, possibly, yeah. I mean, and I don't know, it's a combination of that and a combination of, in a couple of cases, it was like, okay, I finally have a new job and things are finally settling down after years of mayhem. So, we're ready to go, or just reaching a threshold in their lives where they're like, okay, we really need to do this. And, a couple of them came to me where they were like, well, we've been sort of batting this idea around for a while. And, in one particular case, it was a client where I had interacted with him as a member of one of the artists we worked with on the label. And he's like, and I know you, and I know the integrity of the work that you did when you were there. And I can only assume that you're going to carry that over to your new business. And so I would trust you with these decisions. And so that's, and I don't know what that trigger was, but that's definitely been more of that. People from, and I don't know if it's just everyone's finally getting their legs under them after the recession and recovering and feeling more secure with where they're at, and now needing to look at things. Kids are older, and there's a lot of things that have changed, obviously, in the last 10 years that have helped them reach that point. But there's been a fundamental shift in my business, both that now I think in January of 2019, I was managing like $30,000 for a friend, kind of as a favor. And now, I don't know where the market's at today. I'm managing somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000.
Fabulous.
And that's hopefully continuing to change. And part of that is I've changed my focus a little bit on that front to be more aggressive about managing assets, but also just, whatever. That's where my business cycle ended up. And part of it too is the busier I am, the more productive I am. If I only have a project to work on, I can find a million ways to not do anything else. The dog needs attention. The cats want to go for, I don't know. And so if I'm busy, I just sort of keep going. And so then I'm online and I'm more engaged, and, those juices get flowing. And so, with the current market volatility, just did XYPN study group, and we were talking about, well, what do we do about getting new clients in this market? And we talked about just sending out letters and expertise, just calm down and wash your hands or whatever, and we'll be fine. But also saying, if you know someone who's freaking out, send them my way, and trying to find subtle ways to market. And so, we'll see how it goes, but so far, I think I've been able to manage both pretty well. And it's sort of, as my confidence builds, I'm more willing to put myself out there just as indie financial planning. But, I'm actually potentially taking on yet another planning client or planning advisor. So I'm not necessarily slowing that side of things.
Oh, you'd take on an advisor at Indy?
No. Sorry. Another client that I'll be working with as a subcontracting.
Got it. Interesting. I think this is such a fascinating conversation, Leslie. I think it's so important to understand that there's, your goal to help people and to serve clients and to make money are being fulfilled in all ways. And whether it be through Indy or your outsourced relationship, I'm wondering, what advice do you have for career changers who are in a position like yours? I think this whole podcast has been chock full of good tips and advice, but, thinking back to yourself after the 2008 recession and approaching a new industry, what advice and tips do you have?
I guess one of the big one, particularly with an industry like planning that has a lot of different niches within it, whether you're focused on investments or whether it's planning for a particular type of client or institutional, managing of retirement accounts or, whatever that is. Part of it is just figuring out what brought you here. What's your motivation for being a planner? Because there's obviously a lot of different motivations in there. So sometimes it's figuring out what was that trigger. So maybe it's, you have kids or you have friends with kids that are trying to figure out education planning. Like, I know planners that have built their entire business around education planning because it's such a big piece of the market. And I think particularly with XYPN people, which I realize your podcast isn't exclusive to them, but it's providing planning for a younger generation that I think are overlooked in a lot of cases. As much as people talk about it, they're still sort of, well, they're not good money generators. And so I think that's, because they don't have assets. Right. But I think that the biggest thing is sort of figuring out, well, okay, this is what I want to do. So for me, my focus has been less on investment management and more on planning. And so teaming up with someone like Delegated or finding a way to subcontract the planning allowed me to do what I wanted to do and continue to, pay the bills.
Love it.
And I think, if your target is that you want to go out and gather assets and manage them, great, but you sort of need to know what that is and then sort of consider what options are available to you to do that.
Yeah.
So, for me, I was pretty aware of my distaste for marketing, I guess. It's not that I'm not good at it. I'm really good at marketing. I'm not great at marketing me.
Yeah.
I get self-conscious and I start all that doubt creeps in. Obviously a lot of people don't have that problem. Mm-hmm. And that's going to sort of potentially dictate you go a different route. Like I end up behind the scenes on a lot of stuff because I'm subcontracting. Mm-hmm. And I'm okay with that. And some of the planners or some of the advisors that we work with basically say, oh no, we've got, Leslie is the person that, they give us a shout out. So it's not like, but that's not my end goal. I'm less concerned with being that person. But since a lot of our business is built on recommendations, like the majority of the clients that we get are, not always, but I think for a lot of firms, it's about people saying, oh, you need a planner? Call this person.
Yes.
And getting referrals. And, a lot of the marketing you hear about is referral based. I'm sort of distancing myself a little bit from that.
Yeah.
And so it's finding that balance and deciding, how far down that road I want to go or not. Mm-hmm. So in terms of, side gigs and so on and so forth, one thing to keep in mind is, well, are you potentially limiting your referral market and how do you, so that's sort of, I feel like where I'm at now is trying to balance that because there is a certain amount of like, oh gosh, I'm really busy right this second. I don't know if I want to push out and bring a bunch of new people on board. And of course you can't time when people need help or when, so that I think is something that, as you're building out business plans and all of that, which can seem like the tedious part of starting a business. It is important to sort of have some of those. I feel like I didn't for a long time. And I was just sort of like, I'm just going to do it, which is fine. But focus is going to really help you be like, oh, okay, I need to focus here. I need to focus there. And that's going to help me. And that's going to help you decide how you market and who you market to. Yeah. And, what the best way is to check all the boxes that make it work for you. I feel like that's sort of stereotypical advice, follow your heart, but
it's important. I mean, even if that was the answer on every podcast, I think it's really important to reiterate. And
yeah. And I think we're an industry that seems not counterintuitive, but it doesn't seem like that's the driving force behind it, right? It's money and it's intellectual and it's all of that. But I think if you're not into it, you're going to have a hard time keeping it going.
Yeah. Good advice, Leslie. Good advice from someone who has seen a lot of this industry in different capacities and certainly seen a different industry in some different capacities. I've so enjoyed knowing you, Leslie, over these years.
Oh, you too, Maddie. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we got a chance to chat today. Listeners, I really encourage you to check out Indy and to review Leslie and to continue to listen in. But Leslie, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Avocado toast, selfies, a mountain of student loan debt. Gen Y is anything but traditional, and with over 75 million people, it's a population you don't want to ignore. Learn more about how to serve this unique population in our guide called Attract and Profitably Serve Millennial Clients in Your RIA. Discover 3 key ways to tap into the millennial market and 6 things that they want from their financial advisor. Visit xyplanningnetwork.com/millennials for your free copy. Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with Alan and Kitsis, and finally, to find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You are not alone and you are not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm, and that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.